Welcome to the Get Real Movies podcast. My name is Daniel Chadwick Shubat. I'm your host, and this is episode 21, where we will be talking about the new release, McVeigh. McVeigh is the story about Timothy McVeigh, the infamous Oklahoma City bomber, the worst domestic terrorist attack in the U.S. to this day. Crazy story in real life, and now they've made a movie about it. And once again, I'm joined by my co-host Mason to talk about it as the resident American on this podcast. Welcome, Mason.
Thank you, sir. Glad to be back. Not only am I the resident American, I'm actually the resident Oklahoman. I was born in that hospital that was blown up, so it brings a whole other personal tie to this whole story.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm glad you're as old as you are. So you were born before that.
I am also glad about this, yes.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's something I did not know about you until very recently. And when I learned that, I was like, wow, okay. Mason's just part of the movies now, at least.
See, I'm like film history. Like, they should put me up in the Smithsonian as this guy was around this guy when this movie was made. That's definitely compelling museum material for film nerds, I'm sure. He said sarcastically.
Once this podcast is done many years down the line, and we've written our way into film history, I'm sure the Smithsonian will be begging you to do that. So let's just start campaigning now. Yeah, Mason, like you said before we started the show, it's sort of crazy that every killer now gets their own TV show or movie, but I'm excited to chat to you about this film. But one little tidbit before we actually bring you the review of this movie, we're going to be interviewing three of the film's stars. That is Bret Gelman, that is Anthony Carrigan, and Ashley Benson. So that interview will be coming up before Mason and I do our review. I had a chance to chat to them for 15 minutes, a little too short for my liking, but they had some really interesting things to say about the film, and it was quite cool to chat with them. Looking forward to letting everyone hear that, and you as well, Mason, because sadly you weren't able to join me. But
I am sad about that.
Before we get into our review and the interview, what have you been watching this week? What would you like to tell the audience that they should watch?
So I have been just completely binging Severance right now, which I know isn't a movie, but goodness gracious, Severance has got to be one of the greatest shows out ever right now. It's just absolutely incredible, and I can't wait for the mystery box to continuously be unwound. But in terms of movies, this movie completely bombed, and I wanted to see why, because I like the director's previous work and I like musicals. So I watched A Better Man, which is this somewhat kind of sort of biopic of Robbie Williams, who is a star in Britain, which nobody in America knows. And I think that the filmmakers knew this, and so they made him a monkey for whatever reason, make him larger than life, basically. And I will say, the movie is good. I like the movie. I like the music. I can 100% see why it failed in the box office. Again, this guy is not nearly famous enough to have a whole movie about him, which, interestingly, I feel ties into this film that we're going to talk about today. But those are my two big watches as of this week.
I just have to correct you. Robbie Williams is famous enough to have his own movie. Just because Americans don't know who he is doesn't mean that he doesn't deserve to have his own film. There's lots.
If you're not known in America, you're nobody.
Oh,
if you're not first, you're last, Ricky Bobby.
I'm very excited to see this film as well. It's on my list. I was sad not to catch it in theaters, but it was in and out so quickly that I didn't get the chance. So I was sad about that, but I'm glad you liked it, learning about this very famous man that you were just ignorant to this whole time. But
so what have you been watching then? If you haven't been watching the very, very, very famous Robbie Williams, who nobody's heard of this side of the ocean.
Well, I am partly British, right, Mason? So maybe that's why I know who he is. But in terms of what I've been watching, the first recommendation I'm going to make is one that just came out in theaters. Film Twitter has been alight with it. I was unsure if I would like it or not, but usually when you have Michael Fassbender in it, you're going to be all right. And that was Black Bag. I watched that this past weekend, and it was just a really slick, cool, smooth film. An hour and a half goes by like it's nothing, but it puts enough in the film where you feel like you've watched a really, full film. It would take certain people 8 episodes to make a movie like this usually, because he just really condenses everything, but makes it really, really watchable. And the performances are really great. The writing is snappy, and it's just a fun watch. So that's my first recommendation, Black Bag. I did finally watch 28 Weeks Later after I'd watched 28 Days Later recently as well. And it's an interesting one because I feel like for a lot of people who've watched zombie movies recently, like World War Z and things like that, or Train to Busan, they might not find it very exciting because it's nothing new. But at the time, it was new and it was kind of leading the way. And I still liked it. I wouldn't say it's an instant classic, but it just gets me very, very excited for 28 years later, coming out later in the year. So I would say those are my two recommendations.
I know the big fans of the 28 days / 28 weeks later are really like Danny Boyle fans. Like they love the way that he directed those because it's very like shaky cam, very much like jump scares, very much like a lot of frenetic action. So I haven't seen the movie myself yet. I have seen 28 Days Later, but I will put that on my list, 28 weeks, and see how it goes. Another very British film.
Yes, well, and Severance is on my list. I'm just waiting until season 2 is done to finally watch it so I can just watch the whole thing. I know they're trying to renew it or have renewed it already for season 3, but I've only heard good things about it as well. So I will definitely add that to the list. But Mason, before we get into our review, I'm very excited for everyone to listen to my interview with the 3 stars of McVeigh. So let's get right into that. And I'm now really, really pleased to welcome some of the stars of the film McVeigh, Ashley Benson, Bret Gelman, and Anthony Carrigan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be honest, I don't think I've interviewed 3 people at once before, but I'm really glad it's with all of you for this film. To give you a little bit of context, my film podcast, I interview people whose stories have been turned into true story films. So when I heard about McVeigh, I was obviously very interested to talk about this film. Luckily, the main perpetrators of this are not around, so I'm very glad I get to talk to you as actors about this film. But I guess one of my first questions,
intense conversation if they were.
Yeah. There was a joke with my co-host about it. He was actually born in the hospital near the building that got blown up, and he was born, I think, a year before. So we were talking a little bit about that, but. Yeah, we were talking that would be an intense conversation that I probably wouldn't want to have. So for me, one of my first questions, and I guess it would be to all 3 of you, would be this story is a true story and one that I feel like the director and everyone involved had to be very delicate with. And it feels like it was a direct choice not to sensationalize his story. So I guess what drew you to this project, and were there any qualms you had in being involved with this story about the worst domestic terrorist in U.S. history? And I guess I'll ask Bret first, and then I'll ask Ashley and Anthony afterwards.
I was drawn to it, once I heard who was involved. Ashley and Anthony, Alfie, Tracy. This is a great cast. I saw, Mike's work, and I thought he is really this, he has a singular vision in terms of how he tells these very isolated stories very intimately. And in the script, I saw that, that's pretty much how he was going to do it. I mean, it's sort of like a chamber piece of these people and their relationships and the, sort of the mundanity of leading up to this attack. And getting to play and humanize somebody so reprehensible was an exciting challenge. And getting to play somebody who was physically so different from me, probably the most different physically from me that I've ever played. And did I have qualms? No, I think that we should tell stories about horrible things and people who do terrible things. And I thought that by entering through a sort of, a lens of empathy, we were going to humanize these people and thus make what they did more horrifying and it be a more cautionary tale to how this can develop in our society. And so that was really a very, like, all of these things together were a big yes for me in doing the film.
Yeah, everything that Brett said. And again, I was 5 when this happened, so I was very young, but I remember it so vividly. And when I had got the script and I was able to, talk with Mike, um, I was able to just see his vision for making this film. And I thought he did an incredible job with it on such a, horrible subject matter. And, I was on board for 6 years. And after 6 years, I found out who else was going to be part of the film. And I was excited to be amongst like an amazing cast. And I really trusted Mike with this story. And I knew that he would make an incredible movie, and it was amazing to work with everybody. And yeah, I think it's a really important story that a lot of people still don't know. A lot of younger people like my age, they had no idea who Timothy McVeigh was. So I think it's going to be really interesting when it comes out to see people who don't know the story at all, to see people's, reactions, who were there, who lived through it, who were nearby. I think it's an important story to tell, and I think that Mike did a very, very good job at doing it delicately.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback along with that, I mean, apart from what Brett mentioned with the the phenomenal cast, and just how how engaged everyone is with their characters, you could really get a sense from the script what the mood was and what the tone was, and it left you kind of asking more questions, really, and really kind of pondering about it as you were reading it, and really kind of becoming engaged with something you couldn't quite put your finger on, and I think you can certainly kind of feel that in the scene work as well. Yeah, honestly, I mean, I think the everydayness of it, as opposed to this sensationalized version of radicalization, that it is this kind of everyday normalcy and weirdness, and especially me playing this character that really is nudging McVeigh in this certain direction. Yeah, it definitely, even after filming it, left me with more questions. And as far as qualms, no, I mean, I think that we were all wanting to tell this story and wanting to, yeah, have people really kind of think about it and ask their own questions.
Sure. One of the interesting things for me is, Brett, your character, Terry Nichols, obviously we know existed. He's still in prison to this day, and was quite a fascinating character because in the end he didn't go through with it. He did all the work and obviously was just as responsible, but he didn't go through at the very end with it. But then when we come to your characters, Cindy and Frederic, who I thought it was quite funny, he was French Canadian, as a Canadian myself, but these characters could have existed, but as far as my reading led me to believe they weren't. So was it sort of nice having more of a blank slate with those characters? Because I felt like they did add a lot to the film in terms of humanizing McVeigh in a weird way, and also showing that there was, even though his intentions weren't really clear, there was a little bit of pushing on the side as well, and showed that radicalization can really affect just people who seem like normal humans. So I guess, Ashley, I'd ask first with you.
Yeah, I think being able to play Cindy, I think it just showed exactly what you said. Tim is a human. He's a person, and I think she was very interested in how off-putting he was. He was very quiet. She kind of had to really get things out of him to talk and make a connection. And they did. They ended up having a connection. They liked each other. And, Cindy being completely unaware of his motives throughout the whole film, I think their scenes together just really showed Tim in a different light. And, him really just being kind of a lonely person who's yearning for a connection, and it happened to be with Cindy.
And Anthony, your character, Frederic, very different character than I expected when we first met him. And then he obviously sort of introduces Tim to this world that he's already getting in some ways with Richard Snell, but maybe in a more upfront way. That scene where we see the Nazi tattoo on one of the members' arms really stuck with me and kind of made me feel some chills, not in a good way. So I'd love to hear about your character and the blank slate as well.
Yeah, Frederick is definitely a character that's very shrouded in mystery, and you're really kind of like unsure what his motives are, apart from really kind of just, destabilizing McVeigh. I mean, he really is kind of this agent of chaos and pushing him and poking holes and he has just this array of tactics to make McVeigh feel at times welcomed and like he was a man, and then also like he was a little baby and like he didn't know what he was doing. And I think that's all that was all intentional, because it's that kind of destabilizing someone who is already really unsure of himself and angry, that leads to that type of horrific act.
Well, and it seems crazy to me that a movie like this could be timely and poignant, especially in the political environment we have today, where you're having extremes everywhere show up in ways that you don't expect. I'd love to ask, I guess I'll ask you, Bret. One of the things that really struck me about this film was sort of the theme and the approach to the movie. There were a lot of shots of Timothy McVeigh driving in the dark with his 90s car, and I almost was expecting a True Detective style monologue to come, because we're in the Midwest and it just had this dark sort of theme to it. So was that something that was quite visible in the script, or was that something that you maybe talked to the director Mike Ott a little bit more about, and how did that come about?
Well, I think that you can, in seeing all of Mike's work, isolation is a theme, and he really captures that cinematically. And he really, in all of his work, you as an audience member, you feel that silence of loneliness and that desolation. It feels like surrounding every character. There's miles and miles and miles, and when you see Alfie in that car, or you see him with anyone, even if it's in scenes with Ashley and Anthony and me and Tracy, you still feel like they're surrounded by miles of nothing. And I think that isolation is a key part that plays into what drives them to do what they do. It's not really that great to be left alone with your thoughts. It creates a hole. And when something extreme shows up to then fill in that hole, you can adopt that in order to feel alive and not dead. And even if that aliveness is rage and bigotry and political extremism. And I think that this is has a direct correlation to what's going on today. We are in like an incredibly isolated time, that got really exacerbated by the pandemic and just by social media. There is nothing like more desolate than staring into my Instagram for hours on end every day. And I think that this is something that everybody feels. And it's sort of like we're like a dog chasing its tail and trying to find like some sort of sense of belonging of this thing. And yet it keeps promising us that, but we never grab onto it. And so the isolation just grows. And in so doing, you fill in that hole with extremist things, which is like the amount of people that say the type reprehensible things to strangers. Whereas if you met them in real life, they'd probably be like, hey, how you doing?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them, not all
Exactly.
of them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what this movie is illustrating here. And that, like, what's going on in this film is very much happening today to all of us in one way or another. Either we are the perpetrators of that behavior or the victims of that behavior to certain degrees.
I know I only have a little bit of time left with you, so I guess Ashley brought something up that really stuck with me, and it's my generation not knowing much about this story. So my final question to all of you would be, if you could have an audience take away something from this film, what would it be?
Yeah, I think honestly, I really hope that an audience walks away, kind of like what I was saying before, with more questions and with a kind of yearning to explore more about this kind of endemic that's affecting not just the country but the world, in terms of isolation, in terms of radicalization, in terms of how we are becoming so polarized, and really kind of examine it within themselves. But yeah, I think just be able to kind of walk away having been moved and having just given some perspective on it.
Well, thank you so much for joining, and I really appreciate your time. Have a good one.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you so
too.
much.
And that was my interview with Ashley Benson, Anthony Carrigan, and Bret Gelman. I hope you all enjoyed it. I really enjoyed chatting to them, and it was a film that I was anxious to talk to Mason about, because Mason has sort of a personal connection to this story in some ways, but it is unlike what I expected it to be, McVeigh. So before I kind of tell my thoughts, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Mason.
This movie kind of ticks me off on a very broad, wide scale level because it says so much about who we are as consumers. It says that there is a big market for this, that there is a direct audience who will be entertained by something like this, by somebody who, in my personal opinion, would be better off forgotten and not given a spotlight. And I think what surprised me is that I think the movie agrees. I think the movie agrees that this guy is not supposed to be blown up, or so to speak, like aggrandized or anything like that, because it is a very restrained, low dialogue, like not a whole lot of like bits and bobs. It's a very tight movie with not a whole lot of fluff on it, which in a lot of scenarios I would say is a good thing. In this scenario, I would even say it's a good thing. But because it's so restrained, it makes it, in my opinion, a very difficult watch. Like, it is not a very entertaining watch. You are watching somebody just kind of ruminating on the kind of deep-seated anger they have for internal American politics, and then eventually taking action to act on said frustrations. And I don't think that there's any one real weak spot. Like, the performance by Alfie Allen as the main character is fine. It's like passable, but oftentimes he's just kind of like sitting there staring at the camera or staring away from the camera angrily. The other stars get a little bit more to do. Like, Ashley Benson has a somewhat compelling role, and I think that there is something trying to be done there, and like showing that this guy is just so off kilter that he can't have a relationship, he can't have friends, he's only dedicated to this one cause. But this was a weird zebra of an animal for me. It did not really fit into what I was expecting, but I don't want to put that in a good way. Like, it wasn't what I was expecting, but I didn't enjoy it because of that, if that makes sense.
It's fascinating because I understand what you're saying, and I think this film was in agreement there that we should not be in any way glorifying someone like this. He committed this act of mass terrorism and killed a lot of people and a lot of children, actually. And I think that sadly we live in a world where people still want to see that. There's a reason that true crime is one of the most watched categories of TV and film, and it's because it is usually thrilling, and it usually kind of unlocks our deepest fears and really plays on them. When I think of some of the best stuff about true crime, especially acts of domestic terrorism like this, or really, really gruesome crimes, my mind usually goes to TV shows. So I'm thinking about Mindhunter, I'm thinking about Manhunt Unabomber. And I think personally, this story would have been served better as a TV show. Because this is a short film, it's hard to really show where his motivation comes from, even though there's no motivation that could possibly be okay for what he did. Waco, another great TV show that they did a couple of years back, but Waco was this big thing, in the 90s, and a lot of people became very anti-government after that. It doesn't even present that in the movie that well, I don't think. And I think that this film might have been more well served if it had either been a TV show or it had a little bit more time to flesh it out. Maybe it didn't have the budget. Maybe it didn't have a bunch of things that were going for it. It didn't have studio approval, whatever. I can't get in on that, but I think it's a very quiet movie, and I didn't really know what it was until we got to the end. It didn't show much. It kind of threw in characters that you don't understand why they were really there. I did a bit of research on Timothy McVeigh before I was watching this film, and they said that he was a loner in many ways and never even had a girlfriend. He was an army guy, very decorated actually, and Waco was, the main reason. They threw in Richard Snell, who was probably the most compelling character of the movie, played by Tracy Letts, and his conversations with Timothy McVeigh were probably the most interesting parts of the film. But there's no proof that Richard Snell and McVeigh ever met beyond he committed this attack on the day that Richard Snell was executed. So I feel like there's a lot of conjecture thrown in where they're trying to make it more interesting, but I think the truth, what actually happened, is more interesting if they stuck to that a bit more. I do agree that some of the side characters they threw in, Cindy, played by Ashley Benson, Frederic, the French Canadian, played by...
They got Cristobal. That was one of my favorite guys, yeah. I gotta disagree with you a little bit here, because you're saying that it needs to be or it would be better as a TV show because you could have more context into what this guy's motivations were. Frankly, I think that the issue with it is that this guy wasn't that complicated. He, like you said, he was a vet. He had serious issues with the way that the federal government dealt with the Waco situation. He had serious issues with the way that Richard Snell was treated. But it was very surface level. Like, there was not a whole... This didn't need to be a character study. Like, you brought up Mindhunter earlier, which I love Mindhunter. I don't think that this guy had a mind that needed to be dove into. It's just a very, I think, shallow man who had a very shallow way of dealing with things. And so because of that, too many people paid the price. And I struggle to see the point of the movie itself. Like, a documentary, maybe, but even that I think would be too much. Because again, this guy doesn't have this storied history of, like, super white supremacy or super, like, anti-government. Like, he has a history of it, but it's not like this big bombastic history. Like, it's nothing to really be interested in or really compelling on screen. And at least the movie doesn't give me really any reason to care about his situation. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, I don't want to feel bad for killers, but if you're going to make it all about this main character, you got to give me at least something to latch onto here. And I frankly just didn't see that.
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? Because he's the focus of the film, but he's such a bad guy where the filmmakers don't want to make him seem too, I don't know, where you might care about him as a character.
Like, too sympathetic.
Like you said. Yeah, too sympathetic. But it's also, maybe it would have been more served to focus on maybe some of the people that were affected by it as well. But I do think that they could have gone down a different route where it might have focused on Richard Snell and his story and different things leading up to that, because, right-wing extremism, it's an issue today still. And, when you see people marching on the streets with Nazi flags, I think that was the most poignant part of the film, when Timothy McVeigh is hanging out with a bunch of neo-Nazis, and he feels uncomfortable because, like you said, there's not really any huge point to why he's doing this. He just doesn't like the government and wants to do something about it, and has been brainwashed into thinking that. But you see a woman, and she's a mother, and she's being nice, and she's cleaning up after him, and then you see she has a Nazi symbol on her arm, and it just kind of struck me because, for me, my family has a big history in terms of living in Europe during the war, and that symbol still bothers me to this day, as I know it does to most people. But seeing that in the film, and it was just strange, right? Because you have this domestic terrorist who killed hundreds of people, and even he's like, oh yeah, this is too much for me, white supremacy. Ugh. And I'm just like, why what is this choice here? I don't really
Yeah.
get it.
Well, like, where's the motivation? What led to this massive decision to make such a big action? This reminds me a lot of when they made a movie about the Unabomber. I think it had Sharlto Copley in it, and I actually really enjoyed that film because it was similar in how it didn't make the killer sympathetic. It didn't apologize for anything that the killer did. At the same time, it did show very clear reasons for why he went from a guy living in the woods to a guy who was very, very cleverly sending bombs to create the max amount of impact. So I didn't like the guy anymore, but at the very least I understood him more, and that at the very least let me be more intrigued by the movie. This guy might as well be McVeigh might as well be like a blank slate who's just angry at the world and then blows up a hospital in Oklahoma City. And that just makes me want to know less about him and hope that he gets forgotten in history.
Well, it's interesting you bring up Ted Kaczynski, because I think he's an infinitely more interesting character in terms of what his motivations were, some of the stuff he went through as a student at university. Like that show that they did, Manhunt Unabomber, was fantastic, and just some of the stuff he goes through, he instantly becomes a more understandable character. He's still a immoral human being who committed these crimes that most people can't even fathom. But it's at least a character that you want to learn a bit about, whether it's, you hate him or you understand him. It doesn't matter, but you want to learn more. But I do agree, this film, I cared more about learning about Richard Snell, Tracy Letts' character, and Anthony Carrigan's character. And even to an extent, I find Terry Nichols quite a bit more interesting, because he didn't go through with it in the end. Hearing about his motivations, why he didn't do that, and then he sold out McVeigh, and that's why he didn't get the death sentence, and that would have been quite interesting to hear or see on the screen. So I'm just not sure if they focused on the right guy. I think Alfie Allen did a good job. I think he did a solid job with what he had. And I think the rest of the cast did too. I saw a lot of those car shots of them driving through the Midwest,
Yeah.
and I felt like I was being transported back to True Detective season 1, and we were about to get a rusty monologue or something with Woody
Time is
Harrelson
just
rolling
a
his
circle,
eyes.
circle. Yeah.
Yeah, time is a circle. Yeah, but yeah, it was. I don't know. I think they could have made it like an hour 10 if they hadn't just showed the cars driving through the night.
Honestly, yeah, probably. I don't know. I don't want to hate on this too much. I want to give credit to the director for. I feel like they show the Midwest, they show the situation very scientifically and well. I think they do a good job of not giving the killer any more sympathy than he deserves, which is zero. I just wish that there was more that I could latch onto with the character. I wish there was more compelling material for me, if not for McVeigh, then for the people around him. Like I liked Cindy, I liked Frederick. I'm not gonna say I liked him, but I did find Richard Snell compelling in the movie. Like I liked Tracy Letts' delivery in the movie. So just I completely agree with you that the focus was just not on the right character, or another way to go about it would be to just redo the way you're studying the character. But yeah, overall,
Sure.
not my favorite, but I see where the effort was.
What would you give as a rating for McVeigh, Mason?
I would say skip. I don't think this needs to be streamed. I don't think, and this goes in some of my personal feelings about the whole thing. But stop giving bombers and killers their own Netflix shows, HBO specials, movies, whatever. I get it. Sometimes it's good entertainment, but we don't need every single one to get a movie, and this one's just not worth it.
I'm a big believer that if people who commit mass crimes like this, whether it's shootings or knifings or whatever, if they do, if news was just not allowed to say their name and things like that, it might kind of bring down the number of people who want to do it, because there's always this sort of weird sense of grandeur where they want to become famous, whether it's for completely the wrong reasons. And that's one of the things I hate as well, is I don't think you should give any publicity to people like this. I understand that some of the best films that we've watched are these true crime movies. I think of Zodiac. That's a film that I kind of thought about recently. But you can make your own stories with that without having to copy or having to name real people. So I would agree with you on that. In terms of my rating, I'm a little torn between skipping and streaming it. I think that it's still an interesting piece, and some people might find it interesting and something to look at. I don't know. I'm gonna go. I wish I could make up another rating.
If you're drunk and you just need to put something on in the background, play McVeigh. That's Daniel's grade there.
I can neither confirm nor deny what Mason said, but sure, I'll say if it comes on TV, you don't have to switch the channel.
That's a good middle ground. I'm proud of you.
Thank you. I just hate agreeing with you, Mason. That's the main reason.
What can I say? You agreed with USA, and so now you're on the record. Now you'll be noticed. That's good. Now, if only a better man would have done that, and it would have been golden. See, I brought it back.
But yes, you did. Mason, before I let you sign us off, I did want to say thank you to the cast for coming on the show. Normally, I'm interviewing the people who are involved in the true stories, but that wasn't an option because McVeigh is 6 feet under. And
that's terrible.
And I don't think I would like to chat to him or Terry Nichols, but I was really happy to talk to some of the cast about this film, and I know they put a lot of hard work into that, and I will always respect that. So thank you to the three of them for coming on the show, and I'm sorry about my co-host who disliked your film, if you're listening.
If I like everything that we talk about, there's no point to listening to the show. I'm just saying.
True, Mason. But as always, lead us out. Thank you once again for joining me and talking about this film.
Well, if this podcast made you want to forget that this terrible event even ever occurred, then maybe leave us a like and subscribe. You can leave us a comment on Spotify, and you can let us know everything that you thought about the show. You can also let us know how you feel about Robbie Williams, if you even knew that he existed. And I said Robbie, not Robin, just so you know. Like, a lot of people might get that confused. Rightfully so. But until next time, I've been Mason.
I've been Daniel.
And we'll see you at the movies. Bye, y'all.